This is the IBJ Podcast for the week of Monday, June the 3rd, 2024, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Usually, when we're talking about economic development and economic impact in Indianapolis, we're referring to a multi-million or multi-billion-dollar real estate project, or a one-off sports or convention event like GenCon or the Super Bowl. But much of the talk in the last few months has been about a living, breathing basketball star from Iowa, who in a very short period of time has changed the financial expectations for women's basketball, not only for the Indiana Fever, but the entire WNBA. And of course, we're talking about Indiana Fever rookie Caitlin Clark, who is bringing thousands of new fans downtown Indianapolis for every Fever home game. Now that we're a few weeks into the WNBA season, we have the benefit of hindsight on a few metrics. We know Clark broke records for merchandise sales. We know she's selling out basketball arenas and driving up ticket prices in a league where average attendance last year was about 6,600 fans. We know the WNBA draft this year had record viewership, and that the audiences for ESPN's coverage for games featuring Clark have dwarfed numbers from last season. But the Caitlin Clark effect could have even more staying power. Clark has arrived in the WNBA at an opportune moment. The league is in negotiations for a new media rights deal, which could significantly increase revenue. And after the season, the players' union and the league can negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement that can significantly raise compensation. You'll recall the outrage heard across the sports world last month when fans learned that due to the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement, Clark's salary this season would be just a smidge over $76,000, about 1/100th of what top rookies earn in the NBA. We have two guests this week to discuss the short-term and long-term effects of Caitlin Clark's stardom on the Indiana Fever, the WNBA, and Indianapolis. We do need to recognize that for all of the attention Clark received last year for her otherworldly shooting and her pursuit of the NCAA Division I scoring record, the WNBA already was on an upswing, and there are at least a dozen high-profile rookies besides Clark in the league this year who are driving fans to the game. And we also have to acknowledge that although Clark's stat lines have been impressive, the Fever's record as of June 1st was 2 wins and 8 losses. A quick timestamp too, when we conducted this interview, the Fever were 1-7. Our guests this week are Ann Bastianelli, teaching professor in marketing at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business, and Beth Livingston, an associate professor in industrial relations at the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business. We're going to dive into all of these issues, and we've saved some room to discuss whether a poor showing by the Fever this season could take some of the wind out of the Clark Effect's sails. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast two excellent guests this week. We're speaking today with Ann Bastianelli, teaching professor in marketing at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. She has more than 30 years of experience in the advertising industry and in other corporate environments. She also played both basketball and volleyball for Indiana University. Ann, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Mason.
And our second guest is Beth Livingston, an associate professor in industrial relations at the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business. She's also faculty director of the Door Tippie Women's Leadership Program at University of Iowa. Given your Iowa connection, Beth, I'm going to assume you have a passing familiarity with Caitlin Clark.
I've heard of her. Yeah, she's been around. She's a Tippie student, so we're proud to have graduated her this year.
Is that right?
Yeah, she was a marketing major.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
No marketing.
Yeah, there you go, right?
All right. It sometimes happens, it takes me a few weeks to get the right guest together at the right time. So instead of having this conversation before the beginning of the season, we're having it about 2 weeks into the season. And actually, I think that gives us a little bit of an advantage now, and it's worth exploring. As it happens, Caitlin Clark scored a WNBA career high 30 points last night in a loss against Los Angeles. In that game, she was the first rookie in WNBA history to have a stat line of at least 30 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and 3 blocks. If I told you a month ago Caitlin Clark would be averaging 17 points, more than 5 rebounds, and more than 6 assists for the first 8 games, what would you have said? What were your expectations?
That's about what my expectations would be, actually. I mean, we had high expectations for her coming out of Hawkeye, just being intimately aware of what she could do, watching her inside and out, but knowing the caliber of competition that she was going to go up against when she started in the league. As someone who's been watching the WNBA since I was in high school when it started, it's exciting to see. But I also acknowledge that the woman has been playing basketball nonstop since October, and that is just a very long season.
Although it's been a few weeks, we're a few weeks into the season for this conversation, Mason, I had several interviews about this from like the night before. And what do you think is going to happen? And how many points do you think she's going to score? And what if she's just ordinary? What if she comes out of college and she set all these records and those sorts of things? What if she just has kind of a meh sort of season? And, my comment was, well, first of all, when you move from any level to another, whether it's high school to college or college to the pros, whatever, it's a sea change. Everybody who plays in college was the best player at their high school, often the best player in their state, or in some cases, their country. And so the level is just so different. My thought around that time was you've got to be patient here for a little bit. So she kind of gets a feel for this. Although, as Beth points out, it's not that she doesn't have tons and tons and years of playing experience. It's just that she hasn't had it at this level. But I'm delighted, not surprised, but delighted that she had a game like that. Because it's been, the NBA had scheduled, and I saw a note that said in the first 15 games of the season, the WNBA had shifted the FIBA schedule so that those teams were 180 and 100. You know what I mean? These are the best teams in the league. And we have a kid that, as Beth said, just got out of college 3 or 4 weeks ago, went through commencement,
It's been great to see her thrive. And what I find interesting as someone who, teaches leadership and things like that is I always used sports examples in my classes when I'm teaching about leadership and management. And I just think it's really fascinating to watch her do what she does, to watch her learn in real time, to watch a young person grow, I think is really a special opportunity, particularly when their ceiling and their capability is so high. It's really exciting to see someone do that. And, just the eye test, if you're someone who watches basketball, you've watched her, the way she sees things and the way she moves on the court. You've watched her all season long. It's like watching an expert chess player see moves 20 moves out, right? Like you're seeing her do that. And to see her now going up against people, as you said, Ann, who can challenge her in really unique ways. And it's that iron sharpens iron. And it's just really exciting to watch.
So one of the things we now know, too, is how well the ratings are going to be. At the beginning of the season, many expected TV ratings for WNBA games to improve significantly. We know now that for the first 5 WNBA games that aired on ESPN this season, the network averaged 1.43 million viewers, which is up 226% from last year's average, which was an improvement on the previous year. How does that strike you?
Well, I mean, I think we saw the trend happening. The trend has been happening for a few years now in terms of the NCAA women's sports. We could watch those trajectories. And I think we watched the WNBA last year have some improvements. And so anytime you're looking at that, you're looking at the sort of linear trajectory. And then in that linear trajectory, you're looking at these one-off crazy things like a Caitlin Clark that can just bump your line up a bit, right? And I think there was a lot of curiosity as to whether it was a novelty thing. Well, after you watch her play a couple times, you just won't watch anymore. And I think what we're seeing is an expanding and reaching the people who really wanted to watch and didn't know how. And now these games are accessible in a way where are they? They're available now. And I think that is something I'm sure Ann knows more about the marketing than I do in that. But part of it is you have to, if there's a product you want to sell, you have to make it available to people to be able to access. And I think what we're seeing here is finally people saying perhaps more people would watch the WNBA if they knew where to watch it.
And there's more and more televised. Simply, there are more of them. They're larger venues. Because there's larger venues, because they see the demand, of course, this is, economic. Gosh, where else can we play? And it's been for a bunch of years, they were finding arenas that were, maybe 7,000 people. Now they're playing 17,000 at a time. So I think it's going to hang on. And I also think that one of the things that's really interesting about this in particular is, Aaliyah Boston, brought in by the Pacers last year, those guys have already been teammates for each other. She's Rookie of the Year. And so people are really fired up about seeing those guys play. So all systems go.
We've developed kind of a shorthand for all this. Who knows who came up with it? If anybody trademarked it, it's the Caitlin Clark effect. It's an interesting phrase to me because we're obviously naming her as a person, but we're also implying that she is a brand. She is an effect. And I know you've broken down the Caitlin Clark effect into at least three elements: brand, target, and culture. Can you expand on that when we kind of dissect the Caitlin Clark effect and why it seems to have so much power in this moment?
Well, first of all, she seems to have a terrific amount of self-awareness. In addition to all the other kind of stuff that she's doing, she is genuinely and very comfortably herself. To be a strong brand, have a strong personal brand, you've got to have great self-awareness, know what your story is, and then go out there and live that in the relationships that you have. And so she's done that nicely. Whether or not people have talked to her about that or have encouraged her to be more of who she is, don't know. But there are three sort of elements that you want if you're looking for content that people really want to consume. And one of it is, what's the brand about? The other one is, do you know who you're talking to and what do they want? What is the target interested in? And in this particular case, I think you see lots of people. We are really in a moment about women's rights and equality and opportunities. And although Title IX was 50 years ago, we really haven't seen lots of movement. I mean, there have been some significant sorts of things, but there's still some frustrating things about inequalities. And when you see someone come along like this, we pin lots of hopes in them that says maybe this will do it. So I think there's a target appetite for things about girls and girl power and equality and those types of things. The third thing is the culture ready for it? And I think culturally, again, whether it's and you kind of see within the target and within the culture, kind of a similarity here. Lots of conversation about women's issues right now, whether it's about Roe, whether it's about pay equality or those kinds of things. I think that stuff is happening. But there is also lots of excitement, even in the last couple of years, about women in the NCAAs and coming forward. There still seems to be kind of a nagging disbelief that women's sports can be as exciting as men's, or can warrant a type of audience that is loyal and rabid and spreading the word and those kinds of things. And I think that you've seen with the NCAA, starting at Iowa, in the Big Ten, and in the NCAA, and over the past 24 months in particular, although Caitlin's been good since she was a freshman, I think you see those three things. She has a very strong brand. They understand that the target is current basketball fans, potential basketball fans, parents of young kids who want to be great. So there are several different subsegments in the target area. And then culturally, I think that there is a desire to really see how far can we take this. This is so extraordinary.
And I think what's interesting too, what you mentioned about the Caitlin Clark effect, just to add on to that, is we are now in an era of athletes being able to directly communicate with those target markets in a way that they haven't been able to do before. And so they don't necessarily have to be filtered through our cultural understanding of gender norms around what an athlete is, around what, right? There is I can, through NIL, of course, now that we know this national, this is sort of image and likeness, right? Like those rules, but just social media in general, where it used to be, how did you learn about the team you cared about? Well, you read it in the newspaper the next day about how your team did. If you listened to it on the radio, you watched on TV. Now you can follow all your favorite athletes on all your favorite teams, or follow an athlete and not necessarily a team. So you have a bunch of people around the country who don't care about the Iowa Hawkeyes. I'm not going to take offense at that as an Iowa Hawkeye, but they don't care about the Iowa Hawkeyes. But boy, do they like watching Caitlin Clark, because she's exciting, because she does really cool things, and they can follow her and watch clips of her and have access to that. And the algorithm on their social media will continue to show them those things and excite them. And I think that's part of this growing Caitlin Clark effect, that the culture, as you mentioned, and the environment is supporting that. And I will say something that's been really fascinating to me as someone who does sort of gender work as well is I'm seeing little boys, and this is Iowa, so of course, that's unique, right, in terms of that. But I have a kindergartner son and I have a 12-year-old daughter. And my kindergartner son, his little friends, little boys that live in the neighborhood, wear Caitlin Clark jerseys all the time. And when they go out and they shoot ball, they say, I'm going to shoot like Caitlin Clark. And that is not made up. They're in my backyard playing. I actually listen to them say these things. And my husband, who is the biggest Michael Jordan Bulls fan ever in the whole history of the world, because he is a boy who grew up in the 1980s, right? So of course, this is what he listened to. He said, he'll go out and he'll say, oh, who's the best basketball player? My son will say Michael Jordan because his father says Michael Jordan. But these little boys he plays with will be like Caitlin Clark. And of course, we can kind of smile about that as, we watch the Pacers and we watch LeBron James and we watch, men's basketball players who are this archetype of what great basketball is. But there are children growing up now, girls and boys, whose archetype for good basketball is Caitlin Clark. And that's not a world I expected to grow up in or to live in, to be honest.
Soon after she was drafted and signed her rookie contract with the Fever, there was perhaps a predictable shockwave of cognitive dissonance when people found out that her base salary as a WNBA rookie will be about $76,000. I have a sense of this, but can you explain for our listeners, why is that the case? Why is she making about as much as my wife, who's a high school teacher?
So what's interesting about the WNBA started as an offshoot of the NBA back in capitalizing basically on the 1996 Olympics, which was the first time they started marketing women's basketball, in the Atlanta Olympics. And we started paying attention to it. Just unbelievable. And I was in high school at the time and it was just everywhere, right? So we got Next, which was this whole advertising, right? People, I'm sure marketing PhD students have written dissertations on it, right? In terms of how successful it was. And it started out, and it has as many as burgeoning new businesses, new industries, new conglomerations of companies. It had its ups and downs, right? And I think, but it started this narrative that the WNBA was a charity kind of started by the NBA because of women's rights, right? They just started a charity and it doesn't really make much money and it's not really very successful. So what you end up with is you have a shortened season, right? It plays in this off season, this between the NBA seasons. And so they play fewer games. And so you end up getting paid less on average. And the way that companies create their compensation systems, the way that leagues create their compensation systems are often through these really complex algorithms that take into consideration expenses and recruitment costs. And I don't know how many of you all have ever sat down with your salary and say, why did they choose to pay me this amount of money, right? And if you are in HR and in compensation, you could explain all of the different variables that went into it. But most lay people don't even know how their bosses came up with paying them, offering them the amount of money, $10 an hour, $15 an hour, $50 an hour, whatever. With the WNBA, what you're talking about is a relatively new league that has gone through a number of cycles of expansion and contraction over the last 25 years. And you are seeing that reflected in the salary of the players, where you have some of it's constrained by collective bargaining with what we agree to do. And some of it is constrained by management practices, who owns these teams, who wants to invest in these issues, and some of it in those cultural limitations for growth that we have seen hamper a lot of women's sports leagues that have, professional sports leagues. I do think it's important to recognize that we're only 25 years into this women's professional basketball experiment. And when the NBA was 25 years old, it also was not an incredibly they were showing finals games on tape delay the next day, right? That's kind of the famous story that has been told. And it took big stars driving marketing dollars, driving sponsorships, capturing media attention to put the NBA in the position that it is today. And so I think that component of the business is not unique to women, perhaps, but it's really about the sort of burgeoning market that we're trying to build. Unfortunately, that means that in some cases, those salaries will be less than their male counterparts because they're playing apples and oranges. They're in different leagues. But I do think there's still a conversation to be had as to whether that's the right amount of pay for the work that they're doing and whether the league can afford to pay them more. And that's a different conversation than whether there's equity between the NBA and WNBA, because those are very different things.
I think, much of this is also driven by their collective bargaining agreement, which is not strongly in their favor. I mean, this fall they can renegotiate it, but right now they get a percentage of the incremental amount they bring into the NBA, and they're not profitable. And so it's, it is kind of, I think the NBA thinks, well, look, we got a league. We got a league for the women and we're expanding it and those types of things. But the men get 50% of all of the revenue of all of it, and the women get 50% of the increment, which
is a very different.
Because, it's kind of in launch mode, as we said, and there hasn't been a real demand for it the way that I think they thought. In 1996, I think people thought, God, people really love basketball. And gosh, we shouldn't have an off season. We're not going to have the guys play all year round. Who else could we, let's see whether or not there's an appetite for this. So, that made some sense. But I don't think that those things have caught up with each other, number one. And number two, I do think that there will be a very vigorous conversation when they start to negotiate this new agreement that's coming up. Because I think when people actually see the number, as you point out, Mason, they go, well, wait, they're not even making $100,000. I mean, how does that? Why am I paying $175 a ticket? Anyhow, those things have not reached a level where it makes sense.
And I think it is interesting too to make something kind of clear here is that for a number of years, a lot of the WNBA teams were kind of sister teams to NBA teams. They were owned by the same owners, right? I think you pointed out, and something really important, which is there are marketing benefits to marketing basketball as basketball, right? If you're the NBA and you can market basketball year round and you can get eyes on basketball and say, right, there's marketing benefits to that. But there are management detriments to being managed by the same ownership structure because people have biases. And we saw this, for instance, with James Dolan, who runs Madison Square Garden for a number of years. He owned the Knicks and the Liberty, right? And Madison Square Garden, owned all that. And I mean, it was comic, kind of legendary in terms of how little emphasis and importance he placed on Liberty. Like he just didn't care, right? I mean, just really remarkable how little this person cared about women's basketball and you can see the improvement in the Liberty since they've had a different ownership group who has invested in the leadership and the management and the front office and the facilities and invested in the product. And I think being able to acknowledge that there are marketing benefits and management detriments and the importance of having a management team that recognizes the biases against women's sports, that recognizes their biases coming into this and says, if this is a business that the product was not women's sports, and you could take out all your implicit gender biases, what would you do to turn a business around? How would you invest in your human capital? How would you invest in your physical capital? How would you market those things? Right? If you could look at that product and take those implicit biases out, that's what I'm excited about with my hope for the future of this league is that we can get people in management in these for the league as a whole, but in these individual teams to show what can be done, because I think there's a lot of money left to be made.
Right now, they're in the portfolio of sports entertainment, which is, Pacers or these other sorts of, in any type of organization, the money's going to go where they think the demand is highest. So if you happen to work for an organization in a division that is small or that is in launch mode or is going to require a lot of infusion of capital, you often don't get what you think you deserve.
Okay, let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with the latest edition of the IBJ Podcast. In my interview with Ann Bastianelli and Beth Livingston about the Caitlin Clark effect and how it could impact the WNBA, the Indiana Fever, and Indianapolis.
So just to spell out for the listeners, when we talk about the collective bargaining agreement, the current agreement that the players and the owners are working under now, I think was approved in 2020. And currently, I think for the top 4 rookies that are drafted, they all earn the same salary. I mean, it is spelled out, in that degree of detail. The base salary is about $76,000. By agreement, cannot earn more than that, though I believe that there are some opportunities for bonuses. And then obviously, whatever kinds of sponsorships that you can draw to yourself as a brand, obviously you can take advantage of that as well. Ann, you mentioned, is it at the end of the season when I think they would be able to open up the agreement again and renegotiate?
I think it's November. And you're right. They do have bonuses, which, if you get on the All-Star roster or those sorts of things, there are other marketing sorts of things. If you'll go out into the community and promote the team and those sorts of things. And those are more substantial. Both of those pieces are more substantial than what they would make from a salary perspective. But the fact is they'd be making more money if they were playing in Europe. Mm-hmm. It's not as glitzy, but it's kind of exotic and they get to play. And they would be making more money if they were playing in Europe. It's just harder being the kid sister of a big organization like the NBA.
So what can the players' union do or use to increase their compensation in this new collective bargaining agreement, or at least in the negotiations for it? If you're representing them, what are you going to say to the owners?
I think you have to talk about media and you have to talk about awareness and you have to talk about how many eyeballs are you reaching and what's the potential for that? I think you have to talk about media negotiations. I think there's been, obviously, when we talk about revenue, I don't know how many of your listeners understand what high proportion of revenue is due to media rights, which is such a large portion. I think a lot of times we talk about you aren't selling out arenas. The NBA is not making the majority of its revenue through selling tickets. They're making it the majority of their revenue through media rights. And the same with NCAA basketball and the same, right? And I think one of the interesting things I know that happened with women's NCAA basketball was that the NCAA didn't have any confidence in women's sports and women's basketball in general, even though millions of people watched it every year. And so they packaged the women's NCAA tournament with all the other championships and sold them and said, here, you can have all the rights to everything. And then they said, well, we don't make any revenue from this. I'm like, well, you sold it for that. You priced it at that price because you did not think you could get it for higher. And now who's reaping in the benefits of that? Well, if ESPN bought it for cheap and they're now selling it, they're now getting all those advertiser dollars, right? They're the ones who are reaping the value from that. And so the way we calculate revenue, I think that's going to be on the table. The way revenue is calculated, what's the actual number of that? I think you're going to see a lot of players and the players' representatives saying, I want to see the numbers. What's the actual amount of money and who are you going after, right? Where are you shipping our games, right? If you say, well, no one's buying this, who are you going after? This is a new media landscape. And the NFL is having games on 5 different streamers or something right? There's so many different opportunities. And so I think you're going to see new media becoming a real part of this conversation. And I do think there's going to be a real conversation about where the league is getting their calculations, where they are coming up with their numbers. And I think because it's not as easy as just looking at Nielsen numbers the way it used to be in terms of knowing how many eyeballs are on something.
They are going to have much more data than they used to. They've almost test marketed what could happen just looking at women's NCAA championship and that tournament and the people who came out of that and the teams they spun off on and so forth. The other thing that they have, WNBA is going into these larger venues, so there is going to be more ticket sort of prices. So there's an opportunity to do more of those kinds of things. And I do think that there are going to be adjacent categories that are going to benefit and be affected by women's athletics. I think you might see some things in fashion. I think you might see some sorts of things in footwear is kind of, traditionally we kind of go, well, did she get a shoe? I mean, that used to be the big sort of thing. Even in the NBA, how good is he? Well, I don't know. Did somebody offer him a shoe contract? So shoes, but even historically, Florence Griffith Joyner and the way that she revolutionized the kinds of things that you wear in track finals and those sorts of things. So I think that there are going to be some different sorts of metrics, even past the things that Beth brings up in terms of revenue, that are going to say people who are following women are going to be looking beyond. It's not just hey, it's a different gender than men. So I think that this contract that's going to happen in November is probably going to be it'll be interesting to see how long that negotiation goes on, because there's lots of aspects that people had not counted on.
I want to just backtrack real quick and just throw a couple numbers in there when we were talking about the media rights deal. So I think WNBA currently earns about $60 million annually from its TV and streaming deals with Disney, Amazon, several other companies. And it is currently, I believe, in a joint negotiation with the NBA and Walt Disney Company. Obviously, and Disney owns ABC and ESPN. And Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the WNBA, said in April she hopes to at least double the league's media rights deal. So I'm taking that to mean another maybe 60 million, which obviously increases the pod quite a bit.
There's your what's our revenue, right? Like, I think oftentimes when we talk about companies, we don't think about revenue being able to be increased that quickly. We think, oh, we're increasing our revenue 10% year over year. We're going to sell this many more widgets or what have you. But when you work in something like entertainment, a deal can double your revenue, right? Or triple it even, depending on what you're going with. And so it will be very interesting to see what numbers they're dealing with in November.
So this is obviously a lot bigger than one player. I mean, we have a whole rookie class of people, who the general public knows by name, which is kind of mind-blowing in and of itself. And, and the league had been doing very well in recent years in terms of attendance and in terms of eyeballs, though it seems like the emergence of Caitlin Clark has been a confluence with all of that, and perhaps is going to be able to drive it forward a certain amount. I mean, how much is the Clark effect going to be able to move the needle? Or should we pull back from just really attributing it to her influence?
It can't just be one person. I think rivalries are very important. And you can't have a rivalry unless more than one team wins. Then you just have a dominating sort of thing. I think this is what happened. Beth alluded to the NBA being, it was a great place to go watch basketball, but only people who were really basketball watched it. Otherwise, it's in tape delay until Larry and Magic. And then you get a black kid from East Lansing who goes to LA, and it's perfect for the kind of guy that he is. And then you get a farm kid who goes out to blue collar Boston and just works his fanny off doing that kind of stuff. So you get these, it's almost like a Once Upon a Story, bi-coastal Once Upon a Story. And by the way, huge markets. You had an individual story. So you had the brand stuff, you had the cultural kind of thing happening. You had people who liked them because either a cult of personality or basketball or both of those kinds of things. But I think that the kinds of things that you're going to need for this to work in women's basketball can't just be Caitlin. It would be great, for instance, if you saw Indiana really improve and there was another team, it spurred a rivalry. And if people stay with those teams long enough so they can, it's not like, well, crud, everybody leaves now, and now I can't watch Boston because everybody left. Back then, the Lakers were the Lakers and Boston was Boston. There might be a few people who moved back and forth, but not that many. A great rivalry in the WNBA would be huge for those guys. And then I think Caitlin Clark would be a big piece of that, whether it's Paige Bueckers or whoever else it is. And I think it could very likely be somebody we're not talking about right now. The other person's, could be somebody else.
Yeah. And I think you make a really good point. Rivalries will drive interest. I think we saw that in women's college basketball. We saw these conversations. And I think if you look back at what women's sports have thrived, right? You see a lot of individual women's sports have thrived. You see Simone Biles in gymnastics. You see Serena Williams in tennis. You see a lot of individual sports thrive. And I think what helped the NBA is exactly what you said. It's not just a rivalry, but it was star power. It was bringing people who didn't know if they liked basketball, but were tuning in to see what Magic Johnson was going to do and what was Larry Bird going to do. Those were
He was in the stands.
Right. And those were the passive eyes that Caitlin Clark brought to women's basketball, which was, I don't know if I like these girls doing whatever, but I want to see if Caitlin Clark can throw it up, or I want to see if Angel Reese is going to block her ball, right? Like they wanted to see the drama, the excitement, because sports is entertainment. And I think what you see now, and I think you alluded to just how exciting this rookie class is, Mason. You've been seeing this for the past few years, I think, in the WNBA, and this year is no different. I think this year may be elevating it even more. Just some brilliant self-promoters and brilliant marketers coming into the league. These are not just great basketball players. These are savvy business women. And I think you are seeing, because they've had to manage their own brand, because we are in a new era of that. They've had to learn how to do it. And I think that's going to bring something really exciting to the league. I am thinking Caitlin Clark has the sort of star power that could become the people who hate her, the people who love her, people are going to tune in to watch her, whether she succeeds or fails. And the WNBA cannot ask for anything better than that.
Now, a lot of people point out Caitlin doesn't have to rely on her WNBA salary as a primary source of income. Most of the estimates I see say she makes at least $3 million a year through endorsement deals with a wide variety of very large sports adjacent companies and State Farm Insurance. Now, in terms of endorsement deals, does the rising tide lift all ships? When a major brand invests a lot of money in a female player like Caitlin Clark, does that help persuade other potential sponsors that there is a return on investment here that they haven't investigated?
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing from when you study businesses is businesses often talk a big game about innovation and about risk taking, right? But a lot of them are still risk averse in a lot of ways. And they're waiting for the first one to jump in the water and then they'll follow. And I think absolutely seeing success, someone do something risky and find success for it brings other sharks into the water.
So for our last couple of minutes, I wanted to localize this a little bit. So I'll start with you, Beth. What was Caitlin Clark's effect on the University of Iowa when she played there? I mean, beyond filling the stadium for every home game, but everything else, what beneficial effects could you attribute to Caitlin Clark?
I can't remember the exact number, but our mayor put out a statement that over her 4 years here in Iowa City, she generated multiple millions of dollars of revenue from people coming in to eat before games, to spend time in Iowa City to visit. So there's that economic, but I want to focus on something. I work with students a lot here. I run our women's leadership program. And one of the things that I do is I help with our case competitions. Our undergraduates go and they do case competitions. And I was working with one of our young women and she said, I started here during the pandemic. I started as a freshman here at the University of Iowa during the pandemic. I'm not from Iowa. She's like, I didn't know anybody who went to Iowa. All my friends were like, you're going where? I'm going to Iowa. She's like, and now everyone knows what Iowa is. I say I went to Iowa and everyone knows. She's like, it has made my college experience the most special thing I could ever imagine. And one of the things I love about being a college professor is it's so vibrant. There's just students everywhere. Everybody's excited. And one of the things that's cool about being in the Big Ten is we have this shared sports culture, right? That you're like, wow, wear our Hawkeye shirt. We see each other and we identify over that, right? It's our shared identity. And we feel bad when we lost the night before. And we all feel happy when we won the night before. And seeing that sharedness here on campus and seeing students be excited and proud, that is something that she may not be accounted for in numbers. But I mean, to see the look on that student's face, she was like, people know where I went to school now. People are excited to talk to me about Iowa City and about the University of Iowa. And my college experience will forever be the most memorable thing in my life. And I think that is so very, very special and something that I'm sure most of the students here would thank Caitlin personally if they had the ability to do so.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is something that they've talked about or is even a thing, but I remember when Butler University went to the men's final 2 years in a row, and the university quantified that in some way related to the increase in applications they received. I mean, it was really significant, and it was basketball. I don't know if they came up with something similar.
I'm sure they have. I don't know what the numbers are. I will say that I teach a class and I allow the people who are coming visiting with their students, with their kids to do their college visits. They always walk through my class because it's during the winter time, and they walk through my class and they're all quiet. They watch what I'm teaching and they leave. And I have never had as many people coming to visit with their kids on campus during basketball season as I did. Everyone wanted to be here. And it was, I am certain that there were kids in Iowa who were like, I don't want to go to the University of Iowa. I want to go elsewhere, who all of a sudden were like, well, maybe Iowa's pretty cool. Maybe this is a kind of cool place to be. And I think the University of Iowa, we're a little low key. We do a lot of really cool stuff, but I think sometimes people don't know what we do. And it's been really exciting as a faculty member here because people know when I say I'm at the University of Iowa, they know where that is. And that is, even when I work with companies who are in Europe and Iowa, Caitlin Clark. Yes. So thank you, Caitlin, for making me not have to pull out a map and say, you see the center of the country right there.
And Indianapolis obviously is known for several things already in the sports world, but what beneficial effects could we expect from Caitlin Clark?
I think that people have been fascinated by that. have wished that they had that little something at their schools or in their communities, and now they do. And the thing with Indiana is Indiana has got smart basketball fans. They know basketball. They know how that game is played. It's not a great place to be a bad ref, Indiana. Just not at any level. And she plays great basketball. And I think that, I don't want to be a snob about it, but I think that the fans are delighted to have Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark kind of both here and both seeing how that is. And being on this beautiful wave that has flown over here from Iowa and from the women's NCAA championship. And all of this excitement, the crest of this wave has landed in Indianapolis. And nobody wants the Caitlin Clark effect to go away. Nobody wants the effect of anybody, girls or anybody, to be great at something and not be able to do it at the highest level and to be appreciated for having done it at a salary that makes sense. I mean, I think that people want to see that kind of progress in the country. And so it's a little bit of a metaphor for how we want things to happen. So I think that there really is an appetite for that. Well, separately, I would say, I was one of the first Title IX athletes in Indiana. Back when they said, what's going to happen now is there need to be equal opportunity for girls as well as guys. If there's any federal program, any educational program, that has to happen. And it has taken a long time for people to sort through that and see, what do we have to do? And there was a lot of feet dragging and that kind of stuff. And when I'm in Assembly Hall and we're playing Iowa, and Iowa comes on the court, and we've got 17,500 people in Assembly Hall losing their minds. And of course, TV and all this other kind of stuff. If Caitlin Clark is doing warm-ups, there are little girls and little boys and everything behind. If she puts up a shot and doesn't make it, everybody's happy. It's like they want Caitlin Clark and Indiana to win.
For the Indiana Fever specifically, what are the benefits? I can think of the obvious ones. Obviously they're selling out most, if not all, the games. The merchandise is flying off the shelves. What are the other ways that the Fever franchise benefits?
I think Iowa has, once again, I think the fan experience has been, Iowa set the bar pretty darn high. This is what it could look like. This is what a following really could look like. And it's not just the college kids. It is not just the seniors in college who think, well, this is the last time I get a chance, so I'm going to go. This is everybody who's in college, and this is people who are coming in from out of state, as Beth points out. You've got little boys and little girls who are looking for merch in this. The fan experience is a huge part of the experience of watching pro sports. It's not just what it is that you're seeing down there in the courts. It's who are the people beside you, and what is everybody wearing, and what is everybody eating? Is there a song, and is there all of those sorts? So I think the fan experience for the Fever, the opportunity to create a fan experience around a nucleus of women who really play great basketball is just so tantalizing to a basketball crazy state. And we have Iowa to thank for that. The whole state of Iowa.
Well, we are happy to contribute, I'll tell you. And I will speak for the entire state of Iowa. And I think the Fever can really take advantage of, as you said, the fan experience and make it something truly special. And I think they're doing a great job of highlighting all the successes of this team. I think their social media, they're doing a good job of highlighting clips, of making sure people can see and access these games, even when they're paywalled. You need to be able to see the product to know the product is good. You need to be able to elevate those things. You need to put those women and their chemistry and their amazing personalities, sell your stars. And the Fever, I think, can take advantage of that even more. They can sell merchandise, and improve their brand image, right? And then all of a sudden, when the Pacers are playing, the best case scenario is all of a sudden you've got the Pacers and the Fever in the conference finals, and then the overall finals and winning championships. And what a great thing for the city of Indianapolis if that was the case. And I think I saw that happen this year. I saw the Pacers, they're both playing at Gamebridge. They're trying to capitalize on that. You saw them trying to do this cross promotions with Tyrese Halliburton, right? You're seeing this potential to say, we are all one basketball. To your point, this is not girls playing basketball and boys playing basketball, or men or women, right? This is a basketball hungry state with a history. This is a basketball mecca, and we are going to give you a good product, and people will pay to see that. And I think that's what we're seeing.
If there's one thing that sticks in the back of my mind that I really hope is, I hope they don't get greedy and make it inaccessible. I hope they don't overprice so much stuff that now you can't get in, and now kids can't see it. And now
you got to see the product. People got to see the product.
See it. And it has to be accessible. You got to be able to sample it and get them to try it. And so, gosh, we're right on the edge of it. I hope we do it right. I'm pumped for us to do it right.
For the moment, at least, the team obviously is not doing well. I think they're 1-7. At what point does the air leave the sails? I mean, can this effect continue if, they're like the second or third worst team in the league?
It can continue for a while, not forever. And so there's a grace period, I think, here. Stars obviously sell tickets. Stars bring eyeballs. Caitlin Clark is a bona fide star. I don't think there's anybody who will deny that. And I think you are going to see some grace granted to these rookies. I think you're seeing, a lot of people are like, there's a reason that the Fever and the Sparks and the Sky had top picks in the draft, and that's because they were not very good. But I think you will start to see a lack of patience emerge over the course of the season if improvement is not seen. And I think people will put up with it if they see the franchise making decisions that seem to put the product first and foremost and respect the stars that they're paying to see. If the Fever decides to not do that, to pretend they're not seeing what they're seeing, to not do anything, I don't think the fans will put up with that. I hope they don't leave the WNBA altogether, but they might leave the Fever, and that would be bad for all of us, I think.
I think that they're going to need to diagnose what's going on and fast. I mean, everything happens in real time. So the excitement is going to be terrific, but diagnosing and fixing those things in real time. And you can't pin it all on Caitlin.
No.
And you can't put it all on Caitlin and Aaliyah because those two were drafted first. It's
team sport.
Team sport, man. It's a team sport. And this is staff and this is facility, this is trend. So they got to really, and I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are all over it, trying to figure out what's what.
Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. Is there anything that I've missed, any other point that you guys would like to make that I've forgotten?
When I've gone to see Caitlin, and I've seen her a couple times, and the last time I saw her, it was in Assembly Hall. And as a former athlete, and I was standing next to a woman who I played with. And I know this sounds as schmaltzy as can be, but I mean, it brings tears to your eyes. We did not have those facilities. We did not have those kinds of uniforms. We did not, you were lucky to get, your roommates and maybe your parents and a few other people. It just was not a priority for the universities and for being promoted or any of those kind of things. And now when you see this and you see it's beyond what we could have dreamed that it could. So it is it's not just pride. It's also kind of, well, look at how much progress can be made.
Yep.
And it was like slow, and then all of a sudden. And I hope this all of a sudden really is sustained because it is magnificent.
Great. That's a great note to head on. Well, thank you for taking so much time today. I really appreciate it.
This was great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
My thanks again to Ann Bastianelli and Beth Livingston. Now let's shift for a second to the latest print edition of IBJ, our annual innovation issue, which, as usual, has been several months in the making. The focus is the fourth industrial revolution, known in business as Industry 4.0, as Indiana companies invest heavily in connected devices, robots, automation, and more. Susan Orr reports that much of the current focus is on tying tech adoption and tech training more closely together. Taylor Wooten has a case study in adding robotics from Indianapolis-based Circle Beverage. Mickey Shuey explains how wearable technology is improving safety and productivity. And John Russell details how Eli Lilly and Company will use the latest advances in automation at its planned $9 billion campus in Lebanon dedicated to turning out in-demand drugs. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at IBJ.com. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.